Hey, wake up. Yeah. Got my man Dave, got my man Dan. You know what time it is, and this is 2-6. Yeah. Ask us, we seatbelts, boy. You better strap up. Conversations is controversy. It's time to act up. Carolina ballistics, where the precision's wicked. Tune in and listen. It get deep if you dig it. No reason to act tough. Carolina ballistics training academy. Ain't no reason to act tough. So listen up.
Hey guys, this is Dan. Sign up for classes, buy merch at carolinaballisticsta.net. That's carolinaballisticsta.net.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to our final episode of the podcast. Myself, Daniel. This is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. David Harris.
Yeah, okay. What's up, everybody?
Get excited when I do that. Today we have a very special guest out of the Alamance GOP, Republican nominee, Mr. Ed Priola.
Glad to be here.
This is awesome. Mr. Ed, we've been together for a while. Indirectly, we worked together on past campaigns with a common friend and Mr. Rudy Cartassi and his campaign, which was really cool. I got to see you in action, Ed. That was really cool. For people that may not know who you are, would you mind giving us a little introduction of who you are?
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, I am the child of an Air Force sergeant. 27 years. I went to 10 elementary schools and 3 high schools. He wore the blue collar in my family, like we like to say, and my mother was an RN. She wore the white collar in our family. Wow. So I got the best of a lot of different worlds. I've been active in politics, and I don't like to use that word politics, but I like to talk about the crusade, keeping our republic free. Yeah. My first political experience of a big nature was that for Ronald Reagan's campaign. I worked for 2 years on his campaign. I was first a field man in the Iowa caucuses, and then an advance representative through New England. New Hampshire was my favorite time of that time in my life. Younger guy, a few less pounds. I've got a picture of then Governor Reagan with his arm around me the day he won the New Hampshire primary. That's my pride and joy, other than my wedding ring, of course.
Of course.
So I've been involved in campaigns and idealistic causes all my life. I've served my country, not in the military. They wouldn't let me in. I hurt my knee wrestling in college. Okay. But for organizations for the United States Agency for International Development, places like Albania, Romania, Afghanistan, and a couple of dozen other countries. So that's kind of my introduction in a nutshell.
Awesome.
Yeah, very cool. Now, one thing that I've noticed, especially when you do any kind of research on you, Ed, the main focus that you make is that of freedom. In connection with the climate, in connection with how politics is handling firearms, views the 2A community. Can you give us your thoughts on how the government has pretty much handled the 2A community up until this point?
Yeah, let me just start with freedom. I ran for state representative. Didn't get through the primary, but came pretty good out of the gate, and then in the final stretch, I lost that campaign in Alamance County to a guy who was a 4-term incumbent who had been in politics in Alamance for 30 years. I lost that campaign by 150 votes. Wow. Kind of a new guy in town.
Yeah.
My theme for the campaign was, and still is in my heart, it's all about freedom. Mm-hmm. Everything we do in the community and in the 2A community in the United States and around the world, in fact, certainly around the United States, it's all about freedom. We're under assault. And make no mistake about it, they want to take not only your guns away, they want to take your freedom away and your right to defend it. My theme in life is all about both the First and the Second Amendment. Clearly, the other 8 amendments matter very much, or our founders wouldn't have put them in there to protect us. But your freedom of speech is under assault, Everybody's liable to be canceled these days. And if they cancel that, then they're going to take away your Second Amendment right to defend yourself. I don't have to tell you guys, it's not about duck hunting.
Yeah.
It's about preserving freedom. If you want to keep the First Amendment and the other 8 amendments, the Second Amendment has to stand and stand strong. There's a lot of guise these days of, well, we need common sense gun control. Well, common sense gun control means that one day they'll be taking your butter knives away from you once they go through the whole stretch. So I'm an adamant supporter of the Second Amendment. I think that it's critical for everything else, especially in the United States. I met my wife in Romania, working overseas, teaching people about our Republican, small r in this case, Republican form of government. Teach what it was like to work with the elected representatives, because Romania had been with the other countries under the Iron Curtain for so long. So I met my wife while setting up an advocacy institute to not only teach citizens how to work with their government, their elected representatives, but also how to work the representatives how to work with their citizens. It's a whole new thing we take for granted here. Eventually, I received an assignment in Afghanistan in 2006. My wife had just come over to the United States working on her MBA. She got a scholarship to the University of Maryland, and I went off at 2006 to Afghanistan. While I was in Afghanistan, I had a great opportunity to buy an Enfield rifle, the kind the British had when they were occupying Afghanistan 150 years before that. Yeah. Inlaid mother of pearl, beautiful, beautiful. It was a piece of art.
Yeah.
It probably hadn't fired in well over 100 years, and you'd probably blow yourself up if you actually tried to fire it. So I said, sweetheart, in an email, I've got this chance. It's only $500. Yeah. Now it would be worth probably $15,000, because you couldn't import them after a few months after working there. Got to remember, she grew up in communism. The only people who had weapons in communism under Ceausescu, one of the most brutal dictators in the history of communism, the only people who had weapons in her country, in her experience, were the secret police and the military. Wow. Used to oppress the people, of course. And she told me, if you come home with that, I'm not going to be here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she really meant it when she says things. Let's flash forward in terms of the Second Amendment to Minnesota, right? To all what happened in St. Louis. Yeah. Well, right about that time, when those things were occurring, she got on the phone one day to me. I forget, I was traveling somewhere, and she said, "We need to have personal defense. We need to provide for our defense for
oh, wow.
Home."
180.
She called me.
Wow.
180. Wow. Yeah. Wow. And now we have a 9mm Glock. Yeah. Easy. Yeah. And it was quite a turnaround. So this only cemented what I understood to be the root of our freedom. Yeah. That we need to be prepared so that we don't have to ever fight for our freedom in our own country. So that's a long way of getting to your answer. That's what I feel about the Second Amendment. Yeah. I feel that some folks want to take it away from us incrementally.
Wow. So you said 3 things that gives me 3 questions to ask. You said the first one, I'll hit them and let you answer them. And then the first one was that you said that the First Amendment, people get canceled for anything. And my question is, on that, do we get, because wokeism is a huge thing right now, and if you say the right stuff, even if you don't believe it, you don't get canceled.
Sure.
Even if it's counterintuitive for a country as a whole, you're not getting canceled for saying that. So when do you think that started?
When
Because we
did
used
cancellations?
because back in the old days, and I mean, I was probably in the 80s, I would say that's probably my lifetime. I can remember Republicans, Democrats, Independent, it doesn't matter. We could have a civil discourse, talk about it. Me and you can both say, this is a problem.
Yeah.
And we both could be like, yeah, it is a problem. We may differ on how to solve that problem, but we try to find a middle ground. Now it doesn't feel like the middle grounds exist anymore. It's either, hey, we both can say this is a problem, but you're coming from so far right and so far left that we can't get a middle, and it feels like, I guess that's gone because we're trying to stay away from like, hey, the cancel culture, hey, by people that vote for me. When did we lose the middle?
Well, David, we got to go back some decades.
Yeah,
Many
I'm asking,
decades.
yeah.
Many decades, in fact. We have to go back to pre-World War II Germany. That's where an organization, an institute called the Frankfurt School was founded.
Okay.
And what that was, to make the short story of it, were Marxists who wanted to impose their philosophy on the rest of the world. And they sat all day trying to think about how to do that. Of course, they didn't get along with the other socialists, the National Socialists, the Nazis who threw them out of Germany. They ended up in the United States at Columbia University. It's a group of Marxists thinking nothing else but how to impose Marxism on the rest of the world. Okay. After the war, they disbanded and were invited to go to a number of different American universities, Stanford, UCLA, and Chicago School in Chicago. And from there, they infected our higher education, and basically used their positions to indoctrinate students, thousands of students. A guy named Marcuse was one of those who went to several American universities, and he was the darling of the left in the 1960s. Yeah. In the 1960s, his version of Marxism and socialism was what was parroted by all the folks that were anti-establishment. In those days, those folks are kind of all grown up and taken positions in the universities. And so the universities, probably about in the 1980s in particular, that's when we started getting this infection of Marxism and the idea that the state, not the people, are the important, not individuals are important. Mm-hmm. That didn't work out so well when the Soviet Union collapsed. And communism collapsed around the world. So they had to come up with a different plan. And what they did was, this is where the wokeism and the idea of critical race theory took place. So it was the races that were the separation. If you were of a particular race, you were oppressed. If you were of another race, you were the oppressor. And it's the same thing with a number of other immutable characteristics of human beings. Well, we didn't pay attention for a long time. We as a society, we as people who love and cherish living in a free republic, it's on us. Yeah. We didn't put the darn remote control down and get up and pay attention to what was going on in our schools. And so it's in the last decade or so, this indoctrination has penetrated K through 12 and into the high schools. I know this. I've seen it firsthand. Yeah. I'm not just a university professor. I teach for the university online graduate students. I used to teach at the campus there. I saw it at the campus there. Yeah. That was one thing when it was on the university, the levels there. Now I substitute at high schools. I've been to 5 in the last 4 or 5 months now. And I've seen aside from the total lack of discipline of students, I've seen where the kids are now getting indoctrinated in a systematic fashion to be opposed to the Constitution, to be opposed to the right to free speech, and then, of course, bearing arms. Yeah. It falls right in that, and the other 8 amendments to the Constitution. So you got to go back to the 1930s. Okay. And the Marxist philosophy, and not all of it is entirely Marxist. They argue between each other more than we might imagine. But one thing's for sure: they want to have a downfall of our republic, our right to be individuals with free speech, and the right to bear arms.
So then, my second question would be the Second Amendment piece was where you talk about common sense gun reform, and my question is, even if you reformed, and I don't know where this is lost on 90% of people. But if you reform do laws, right? most of the people that are using guns to commit crimes are not like legally armed, like citizens.
Sure.
So if you do all this common sense gun reform, that affects the people that legally go get guns. That doesn't stop the guy by the definition of the word criminal. He's not going to stop to go get you said that was illegal, so I guess I can't get no, he's not going to stop. He's a criminal.
Yes.
So my question is, where is that loss at the higher levels when you're coming up with these laws? Like, the only thing you're doing is making it harder on me, the legal person that wants to buy this gun legally.
You make a great point. Think about Oregon in the last few weeks. Oregon passed in the election a referendum on how many bullets you can have in a clip. 10, I think, as I recall. You know, what they call it, anything beyond that is...
You're talking about the magazine?
Yeah, the magazine, right. Anything beyond that is illegal now.
Yeah.
So the criminals coming through your, breaking in through your door, it's a greater phenomena perhaps on the West Coast than back here yet so far. So you're disarming people's right to defend themselves. At the same time, the governor in Oregon last week, a few days ago, decided she's going to commute the sentences of all the death row inmates in Oregon, 17 of them, as I recall. So to my thinking, what we're doing is disarming the citizens who are trying to protect themselves of a level not seen since the 1970s of crime and murder and assault and robbery. What we're doing is stripping our rights away. You got to register your weapon. I think even it's a long gun, a shotgun now in Oregon, and yet we're releasing from the penalty of the horrendous crimes that they were responsible, the death penalty. What kind? And then she said in the interview that I read, the governor of Oregon, that if they change their lives and they show a good path to being a good person, then we should consider letting them out of prison. It's a deterrent. When the bad guys get caught in the act, they have a weapon and the police say stop, and their hands go up and they say don't shoot. Yeah. I'm convinced it's a deterrent.
Yeah.
So I think that answers your question.
Yes, sir.
I think it's a lot of phoniness to control and take those weapons away. And let me just add one thing, too, that you guys are well aware of this. Totalitarian regimes take the weapons away.
First thing they did in Germany.
First thing they did in Germany. But you know what? They did. There's a quirk to that.
Yeah.
And just so we know, folks listening know what we're talking about. They took them away. Then they gave them back to everybody but the Jews. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it happened in Germany. Yeah. Of course, in China, communist China under Mao Zedong, he famously stated that power comes from the barrel of a gun. Mm-hmm. And then they took all the guns away from everybody. And if you got caught with a gun, you were executed summarily. Same thing with Cuba. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, they took away all the weapons. At first, it was important that everybody had a weapon, and they said so, famous quotations. And then they took them away because only the government. These are weapons we need to maintain in a safe way. Was the auspice. So it's a lot of baloney. Most folks, they want to take those rights away because they know that's what stands between a free, God-loving people and the government who will dictate what you can believe.
Wow. Then I guess my last question, you said your wife was teaching the small R, teaching them how to work together. Yeah. And I would say throughout recent, and I'll go into... I think one of the reasons Trump was elected is because he still seemed like he related to people. And I won't say it was so much, but it felt like that everyone else already there had lost that working for the people.
I think, David, I think the word you're looking for is authenticity.
There you go.
Right? now, Mr. Trump said all kinds of things that, I had to go, you didn't say that. You didn't say, why did you have to say it that way? I think most folks on the conservative side of the aisle like the policies. I think a little bit would have been more diplomacy
Yeah.
would help.
Yeah.
But most folks like what he stood for, and because he said it in such a rough unapologetic way. They said this guy's authentic. I might not like the way he said it, but I like where it's going. And so I think that you're quite accurate with that.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'd give Governor DeSantis and a few other players the right. I like what I'm hearing.
No, I agree, and I'm not. And when I say it seems like, I'm just going to go on the mass. I mean, it's yes, we have like if we have 100 people representing, and 10 of them are still there fighting for the great fight, but 80% are there to get rich. It doesn't really work out.
Well,
or if you say it's 50-50, even that 50%, where did their way get lost? That hey, you represent your people.
Oh, it gets lost because you an elected official, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, they get elected. And they're serving in office for a period of time, which, by the way, is I'm for term limits, adamantly for term limits because of this. What they're in office, they have a group of people around them and supporters, concentric circles. You're the greatest guy who's ever got elected here. We can't live without you. We need to re-elect you again. Never mind, they're on the gravy train, right? So you hear this after a while, and then the elected person says, "Well, I've been at this for fill in the blank number of years. I'm kind of entitled to a little bit more. Everybody else has got a good retirement system, and they've got this and that. They lose their way." Because they're in that bubble and drinking the Potomac water in Washington in particular. What we need to do at the least, to answer that question, is have term limits where you've got to sit out a term and live under the laws that you pass for everybody else.
Yeah.
Now, I'm in favor of a little hiccup time, whether you've got to figure and reassess whether you are the most valuable person ever, or keep them out forever and you go find another office. Move up. I'm in favor of the move up ultimately.
Now, question. So let's backtrack just a little bit. We talked a little bit about the indoctrination of our children. And a big conversation that a lot of people are having is CRT.
Sure.
Right? But it has been, in my experience, that a lot of people don't exactly know what CRT is. Could you explain to us what CRT is?
Yeah, I'll the basics, because there's a lot of definitions of CRT, and some of it I think purposefully obscuring what the end results are. The end results are we want power, give it to us. We're entitled to it. We've been oppressed, we want power, or they've been oppressed and we want power. We want to determine what equitable results from the distribution of resources.
So back up a little bit. You said, so who are they and who wants power?
Good question. Yeah. They are the leftists, folks that are ideologically driven by the concepts of Marxism, which fundamentally is about one side are the people, the elites, the managers of the state, if you will, and the other side are the people being oppressed. And it's Marx and Engels, the fundamental dialectic was that this is always the case in human civilization, and what we need to do is have the proletariat succeed and take over the society. Of course, Lenin turned it into a whole different thing called the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that meant that some people are more equal than others. You guys know George Orwell, and Animal Farm, where some animals were more equal, and that's what fundamentally I'm against. It's under the guise now of equity in our schools. Well, critical race theory is not taught per se to the students. But it existed a long time before. The claim is that it started in law schools in the 60s and 70s. But no, that's not the origin. That's critical theory is where it started. Critical race theory is when it was evident that the economics of classes wasn't working out according to Marx and Engels. So it's fundamentally about who gets to be in charge. Who gets to say where things are inequitable these days? Diversity, equity, and inclusion are the buzzwords. And the one I like to focus, I've got no problem with diversity. as long as there's diversity of thought included in that. I've got no problem with inclusion. Everybody ought to have an opportunity to be included. I've got a problem with equity as they define it. This is where critical race flows these days. Equity is about, well, we get to determine how to right past inequities. How do we take care of things that happened in the past when we had slavery, when we had Jim Crow laws, when we had all these things that were just wrong. Now what do we do? How do we make that right? We make it right by having everybody have an equal opportunity. And that's where a lot of people equate equity and equality as being the same word, and they're not. Equity means that the administrators of the society, of the schools, of the government get to determine whether or not you get certain resources based on the color of your skin, which is what I learned 3-4 how many decades ago, that the content of your character is what should be taught. This is where the real, it's not critical race theory. That's meant to be a bit of a misdirection by the other folks. It stems from that, but ultimately it's how DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are implemented in our schools, now in our government, at the military academies, you name it.
So I think the problem becomes trying to force equality, or I guess force diversity. And I would say diversity because my personal opinion is just like when they were like, we need black people patrolling the black communities. Okay, I agree with you.
Okay.
But if they got to apply for the job, like we're not talking about like, hey, dude, 3 black people apply for the jobs. We got a lot of black communities.
Right.
Yeah, so we're not being realistic on things we're asking for.
Right.
And I also think like
it ought to be based on merit.
Yeah, and I'm all about and I think sports, and that's why my kids play sports and do it because it's just very simple. He's better than you. That's why he's in. Pretty simple.
Sure.
If you're better than him, I don't care about your color. I don't care about how tall you are.
Right.
I don't care about none of that.
Right.
Are you better than him?
Right.
And it should be that way for 90%. Now, I think when you start talking about equality based on like, hey, me and you are both going for this scholarship and we write a paper, right? And we write the paper, and it shouldn't even be about race. Whose paper is better? Hey, we need this scholarship. If we both have the same kind of income, whose paper is better? It shouldn't be I got in because I was black or you didn't get in.
And you can have a blind test.
Yeah.
You could give the paper without names on it. And but that's not what the advocates of CRT, the philosophy that stems from the teachers and the administrators, that's not what they're advocating. They're advocating that this person is of a particular color and they ought to get a break, and we'll give them 20% off. This person is not. They're the oppressors because of their color. What really gets to me is when they're having this debate about historical oppression. There was a civil war in our country. Something like 750,000 soldiers died sorting slavery out. There were Jim Crow laws after that, I'll grant that. But then came the Civil Rights Revolution with Dr. Martin Luther King. We learned that benchmark. The person should not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And now these folks want to change it because it's a leverage of power. They want to make sure that they get to determine how resources are spent, and it's really quite disingenuous to say it nicely.
It's helping divide the country.
Oh, absolutely.
It's making it where now not only are we divided amongst our belief system, but now we're trying to divide amongst race and every other thing. Yeah. And then as you become, at least from my experience, if my belief system doesn't match the masses of African Americans, somehow I'm a sellout. No, I'm telling you that my belief system don't match, and these are my reasons why.
Well, you're right, and what's not being taught in schools, critical race theory is filtering its way through K through 12 and high schools.
Yes.
What's not being taught in schools is critical thinking. to be able to question, to be comfortable. If you're the only person in that room who feels a certain way, to feel confident in your thought and to be encouraged to feel that way. As long as you can back it up, you should be able to support a good argument. But our kids aren't being taught that these days in most schools.
We have to teach healthy debate, and I think that goes away. And like you said, they're brainwashing. Something you said earlier. And it's not about who's in power now. It's who's in power in 20 years from now. Because if you completely brainwash everyone else out, guess what? They can take your guns and they can take your speech because there ain't no one left thinking the other way.
Wow. Guys, this has been an incredible interview. A lot of really good information. Mr. Ed Priola, everybody, thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for swinging by. We're coming down the last few seconds. If you made it to this part of the podcast, you are the real one. We are Carolina Ballistics and Training Academy. I'm Dan. This is Dave. Thank you, Mr. Priola.
Thank you, sir.
And we are out.